All right, Henry,
Evening.
we're live, sir.
This is the July 20th, 2021 meeting of the Oregon City Transportation Advisory Committee, and it's now in session. And I believe the next part would be the roll call.
All right, Mr. McEnroth,
Here,
Miss Ovaldia,
Here.
Mr. Simmons,
Here.
Mr. Atkinson,
Present.
Mr. LaSalle.
Here.
I believe that is all the TAC board members we have currently.
next item is the minutes from the last meeting. And I would suggest that if everybody thinks they're okay, that we just approve it and move on.
I have one slight edit just from the in the Glen Oak Road corridor analysis, the last bullet point. I just want to clarify if that's written correctly with the request to ODOT about 30-mile-per-hour speed limit, whether that's supposed to be specified or just say speed zone is what's supposed to be ordered. Like, I'm just trying to make sure that the minutes is correct and how the motion was presented. Is that correct?
Well, a speed zone depends on the state on the actual designation by ODOT. So until such time as ODOT does something, it says this is the reasonable and applicable speed, you don't change it, and so they're interchangeable, really.
Okay, I just thought last time we said it, we're not requesting a certain speed or just saying speed zone. I just want to make sure the minutes are correct and how it's written.
Right.
That's the only thing I'm trying to specify is how it's
Okay.
written. So
I-
besides that, I'm good.
I'm sure Kim can check into it. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, we certainly will, Ray. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Then I'm going to move that we accept the minutes as presented, and everybody.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Bob. Everybody who thinks are okay, say yay.
Yay.
Aye.
Yay, yay.
Aye.
Aye.
Everybody who thinks they're not, say no. Anybody who wants to abstain. Next item would be if anybody wants to change the agenda. And okay, so moving from there, we move on to the ODOT presentation, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry. We're supposed to have comments from the citizens. Were there any comments available?
There are some names here I don't recognize. I don't know if they are part of the presentation or not. I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Well, I'm going to make the assumption that these are all associated with the presentation and suggest we move on. And
Very good.
so, ODOT, you're on. Whoever's the lead here.
I am. Good evening, Lucinda Broussard, Toll Program Director for Oregon Department of Transportation. I have with me this evening Matt Delata from WSP. He's our data, I call him guru, but he can break it down. So Matt's with us, and Jennifer Ravi, who's our NEPA expert. So we'll be giving a quick presentation and then, of course, more time for questions and discussion.
That's great, Lucinda. Thank you very much. This is Vance here with the City of Oregon City running the meeting. Of the group, who would like me to make co-host so they can show their presentation?
I think I have the presentation ready to share. So if you want to.
All right, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Making you co-host. I believe that will work.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen now. Let's see. right one up here. This one. Share. All right. Is everyone able to see the presentation?
Yes.
I
good.
have it.
Yes.
Very
Okay, good. All
Next
right,
slide.
Lucinda, ready to
Sure,
move on
next
here?
slide.
Oh, great.
I'm ready to roll.
Okay, great.
So today we're gonna get a better understanding of where the I-205 toll project is, which is the 7-mile stretch between I-213 and, I'm sorry, it's like I-213 or 213 and Stafford Road. And then what things should we be addressing for that project? And my last one that I think is the most important is how do we all make that successful together? Because it doesn't work with just us, it's all of us together. So it's the collaboration that we're looking for. Next slide, please. As you know, House Bill 2017, Keep Oregon Moving, is what's got this moving. I'd like to say that has definitely been the catalyst for what we're looking at as far as tolls on that stretch of road and also along the I-5 corridor, but that the legislature realized that, you know, we have bottlenecks in the state, and here were the I-5 and I-205 were the worst, and how we could address them. Keep Oregon Moving kind of gave direction for that. And then also the Urban Mobility Office was launched in January of 2020. And that was really a focus on those major projects. And the two that the one we're going to focus on this evening is the I-205. Next, please. As you know, we are always short on money, long on a list of things to do. And so far, this one is $324 million. It doesn't, when you think of big budgets, you think, you know, ODOT has tons of money, but never enough. And we're only talking about maintaining our roads and our structures. We are not talking about, and I always say, you know, you buy a house, you may have to change the roof, but what's the opportunity when you get to build the house? And that's what we're talking about. So our shortfall is 324 million. We're also talking about how long people are in traffic, 69 hours each year. You know, it's astounding it's a part of your life and we just accept it, but are there ways that we can get around it? And that's what we're talking about, ways to get through. So without new investments, you know, 69 hours probably grows and it doesn't diminish. So what ways can we find our way out of congestion? Next slide, please. Tolling, you know, we keep talking about tolling. We're going to get you guys a better slide one day. I keep looking at this slide going, you know, if you've been any place else in the country, you realize that everybody's going all electronic, mostly after the pandemic. People stopped accepting cash because it was really a hazard to their business and to their employees. We're talking about doing all electronic also, which means you don't stop. You just continue to drive and we'll deduct that from an account. We're also looking at ways that folks who don't have credit cards or other means have another method to pay. So we'll be doing a big push for Venmo or some other type of mobility payment, just to make sure that we are capturing the whole market. But right now it's all electronic. You don't have to stop. You'll see things above the gantry, which is the white structure that you see there, which will have cameras, readers that read our tags or transponder. I've heard them called many different things, but tag or a transponder, that's about the size of a Band-Aid that would be in your vehicle attached to an account and would be able to deduct that toll. Next slide, please. And then what are the benefits of tolling? I mean, we always talk about it's not a double-edged sword. You know, you get some good and some bad. We always talk about the bad, which is money coming out of people's pockets. But the good of what that money does is the benefit of tolling. We're talking about improved travel time. When you looked at that 69 hours per year, if we can trim that any amount, that means you get some of your life back. And you think time is money, and that's what we're talking about. Also reduce greenhouse gases because now people are moving. So they're not just staying still, which means we don't have the greenhouse gas buildup. It says reduce, and you realize that reduce takes over the whole. I always say we say reduce, but when you think about it, you're talking about reducing air quality. we'll move the needle a little. We will not, we'll never be able to take it down on just a project. It will take all of us to do some different things in our lives. Sustainable funding for investments. And those are not just investments to maintain, but also investments to build new things, right? Congestion management is not just tolls, it's layering many different things. So if we can add some of those new things, new innovations, now we need to pay for those. So it provides another stream of funding. And then equity and mobility. And I keep saying equity should not be one of those things we have to always tell people about. You should expect that that's what we're doing. But in this day and age, we obviously need to talk about it. So to advance equity, and equity means different things to different communities. And that's what we're trying to search out is what does it mean to the communities that we're impacting? Next slide, please. How much will it cost? We don't know that price right now. It really will come when we do a traffic and revenue investment grade, which is closer to when we're ready to open, when we know exactly where the toll points are. But we are planning to do peak tolls, which means when there's more congestion, higher price. When there's less congestion, the price would go down. Is it, $1, $2? We don't know yet. That's what we'll be looking at, but we will be sharing what the numbers are we're using as we go through this environmental review process. So you can at least get a gauge of how this works. Next slide, please. What's it going to pay for? I think it's the next slide, right? That has the map.
It's one or two later, but yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, this one goes great with that one when you can see a visual and then we talk about what it pays for. But we have some core, UMO has some core improvement projects, Rose Quarter, I-205 project, Rose Quarter, I-205, Abernathy Bridge is part of that I-205, and Boone Bridge, along with the toll program. We're also talking about what we need for transit and multimodal transportation options. What those are, we don't know just yet. We are doing the data analysis of that, but we also have an equity and mobility advisory committee that will be helping us, dig through what does it mean by transit and multimodal? How do we provide it? How do we partner with others to provide? So we'll be looking at that. Neighborhood health and safety. I think everybody is well aware of diversion that happens now. We also want to make sure that we're not contributing to that and that we are looking at what that means in the communities, what diversion we may bring from tolls, and then addressing people experiencing low income. House Bill 3055, which passed this session, has, I believe it's section 162, talks about low income pricing for tolls, something we need to look at. Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee is already on that track, along with a host of other folks about how we it's like price for low income. Is it half? Is it exempt? Is it a credit? Is there are many different ways to do it, but the thought is everybody has the same thought. Something needs to be done. So that is one equity measure that we'll be looking at, but we'd be looking at it anyway because of House Bill 3055. So we were on track and now we're gonna it's just kind of sharpening our pencil. Next slide, please. Here's what our schedule looks like for when tolling will start. And you can see that's kind of if you look all the way to your, I believe it's your right, my left, end of 2024, early 2025. We have to go through the environmental review for the I-205 project, which is already started. We are the regional mobility pricing project. I think the next slide gives us the maps. Can you go to that slide real quick and then I can come back to this one?
Yep,
Jennifer?
it's a couple ahead, so I'm gonna skip through them real quick.
Thank you, because
There it is.
it's better luck. So when we talk about the regional mobility pricing project, it's all the rest of I-205 and I-5 from somewhere very close to the interstate bridge all the way down to Boone Bridge. So we are talking about congestion pricing the metro area. We're looking at equity, which is built into our program. We are starting equity in the beginning, not at the end. So it's just like quality. There'll be a time when you shouldn't have to ask us about it. You should realize that we're doing that, but we're not there yet. We'll be looking at climate, congestion, safety, And again, reliable funding. It's kind of the building blocks for a regional mobility pricing project are the same premise for the Urban Mobility Office and for the I-205. If you can roll me back to the,
Yep.
sorry, you're like, okay, it's a little bit of gymnastics here. So the regional mobility pricing project, we're getting that started now. Presentations like this will be happening. We'll also be going out to the community. We're doing simple surveys right now online. It's just 2 questions. We're really trying to gear up for where it's a preliminary or a planning stage of the environmental review. And that will look at where the termini is between that interstate bridge near and all the way down to Boone Bridge and then the rest of I-205, what that looks like. So we're starting that work now. Equity, as I said, in the front, going to go all the way through, and community stakeholders and travelers, that's going to happen forever. Public input is what makes programs work because we're doing it for people and not for ourselves. So we want to make sure that we are delivering what they need. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we do have an Equity Mobility Advisory Committee. It's really 15 members. What you see here is a group that encompasses a lot of other people. It was probably a workshop we did, so it's more than our 15 members, but we have 15 members on that committee. And we're trying to represent many different facets of equity, not all, because there's no way we could fit everyone in a room. And we're trying to find out what equity measures we can put into our program. We realize that we cannot, as I said, equity is priceless. I tell people that all the time. We cannot buy our way out of this. We can just come, it's great that people bring up what they believe would be equitable. We'll send that out to the public to see that they agree with the recommendations that we're going to receive from the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. And those recommendations go over to the Oregon Transportation Commission. And they'll take those under advisement for the ones they want to do. But one of the things I keep saying is we can't put money on equity. We have to take equity as these are the things we need to do and how do we chip away at it. It didn't happen in a day and we can't solve it in a day. So that's our Equity Mobility Advisory Committee. And then next slide. We have a framework. It's actually, I call it a change management because that's basically how I see it. You identify what the problem is, you know, what it is, where it is, and then who you need to deal with. And then you start doing, how do you do this equity work? It's really iterative. You identify the problem and then you start working through what are the measures, benefits and burdens, choose an option and go back and do it again. And it's really refining the process of equity, of finding out, are we doing what people need versus what we would choose to do? And it's a new, I can tell you it's new work. Everybody's attacking it differently. We think this equity framework is good and can use it in other places, and other ODOT programs have picked it up and have started to implement it. So it's a base. It's not the end all be all, but it is a place to start. And this is where we're starting. Next slide, please. Again, we went through this slide, but again, the regional mobility pricing project is all of I-205 near the interstate bridge all the way down to Boone Bridge and the rest of I-205. So Stafford Road to I-5 and OR 213 all the way to the Glen Jackson Bridge. Next slide. I-205 project, as I said, 7 miles OR 213 to Stafford Road, the one that we are laser focused in on right now, and the one that's kind of been going first for a long time now. I think we're moving the needle on this one. As I said, the 5 things that we're always looking for, part of the UMO, part of region mobility, part of I-205, equity, climate, congestion, safety, reliability, or reliable funding. It's always the same. We have the same goals for the program, for toll program, for the projects we have, and for the UMO office. Next slide. Toll rate, we talked about, we wouldn't know what the rates are, but our goal is to have a rate that does both manage congestion and generate revenue. Call it a sweet spot. If the rates are too low, you get a lot of people and you get congestion. If the rate is too high, you don't get enough people and you don't get any revenue. So we are trying to find that perfect spot where traffic is not there. We can dissipate a lot of traffic and we can still get some revenue out of it. Next slide. I think this is where I turn it over to Jennifer.
All right, so as Lucinda has mentioned, we are in the process of doing an environmental assessment through the National Environmental Policy Act. And so we're going to be looking at a lot of different things for I-205 to identify both impacts and benefits. On the screen is a list of the different discipline areas we're going to be looking at. The ones that are in bold and italics are the ones we're going to do a more in-depth dive on. Primarily with tolling, the main impacts are going to be associated with where cars change their travel patterns versus physical impacts. The toll gantries themselves are pretty limited in terms of the physical footprint, but where cars go as a result of implementing tolls can range quite a bit further. So you can see the list of things we're going to be looking at there, ranging from air quality to environmental justice to visual quality, and cumulative impacts. How do all the projects together impact or benefit different resources? So that's what we're working on right now. Lucinda, you did a lot at the beginning, so I'm actually going to hand it over to Matt now. My part got kind of tight in the middle, but that's okay. Matt, can you kick us off on the transportation analysis piece of this?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of dive into some of the details of how we're going to do the transportation analysis. Ray and I met a couple weeks ago, and he thought that you all would be very interested into kind of diving into some of the details about the methodology we're going to use for this study. So a key input into all of our transportation analysis is the modeling work that goes into it. There's really three layers of this. There's the sort of regional level, the metro regional travel demand model that looks at all the modes and how demand can change over time. It's a primary, it uses land use inputs like the household and employment growth forecasts to kind of feed into the long range forecasting. Then we start zooming in and adding a little bit more detail into the sub area. And that's where we're kind of refining the traffic analysis and the routing through the network during the peak hours when there's the most congestion on the network. And then finally, these analyses kind of happen sequentially. We look at specific locations. So this is more of like what you're going to experience on your end. So we're looking at specific corridors and travel times on them and specific locations. So with whatever changes the project has, how does that affect a local intersection? And do we need a new turn pocket or a traffic signal added or something along those lines? There's the three levels of the modeling work that kind of feeds into the bigger analysis. So next slide, please. So in terms of the footprint, the area that we're going to look at, the area of potential impact is really the area where we focus our analysis of transportation conditions. We'll look at some of the regional impacts, but this will be the focus area where we really kind of dive into the greater detail. So what you're seeing here was our preliminary API that's currently being expanded right now to look further on 99E, add more study intersections into it, but it already includes downtown Oregon City, Gladstone, West Linn, and the entire I-205 corridor. Next slide, please. So I'm focusing a little bit the conversation on the traffic analysis specifically because that's what the project is most directly going to affect. But traffic isn't the only thing, and we know that traffic changes in traffic conditions and travel patterns of motor vehicles also affects other modes. So we'll be assessing the impacts for people walking, biking, or riding transit. We've identified some specific performance measures here to look at that. Those include level of traffic stress based on those volume changes and what the impacts could be to the level of service for transit users. So we won't just be looking at the motor vehicle component. We'll certainly be considering other modes as well. Next slide, please. So I talked about models right up front, but you know, the analysis is certainly going to be based on a pretty extensive data collection effort. So it's the models together with the existing data that really give us the analysis that we need. So that I'm not going to read off all the things listed here, but it includes the traffic counts, our looks at travel patterns that we identified in the corridor user analysis, which was attached in your materials, crash history, a sort of laundry list of data points that kind of feed into our analysis. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about the traffic forecast and how the modeling supports that. So we'll be looking at existing conditions, but we'll also be using those forecasted growth. We know this region continues to grow with more people and more jobs. So how's that going to change in the long term, right? We're going to build this project to accommodate the long-term growth, not just the current conditions. So we'll look at 2027. We have modeling for that. We'll also go all the way out to 2045. So we'll be capturing kind of the over the next 20 plus years, what will happen, and our modeling work will inform that. Next slide, please. Going back to the traffic analysis, we have several different measures related to traffic analysis. This is kind of diving into the details of that lowest level of the and most detailed analysis. When we get into the intersection level of analysis, each intersection has a specific mobility standard that's defined for it. It's sort of a minimum performance threshold that has to be met. So what our analysis will do is it will look at that. It'll look at what the existing conditions are. It'll look at that long-term, what it would look like without a project, a no-build condition, and it'll look at it with the project. Next slide, please. Safety analysis, that's also obviously a critical piece that's at the forefront of everybody's mind. So another piece where we use the kind of existing data, the crash history that's on the ground today to inform and identify where the hotspots are. So that's a front end piece of it. What are the current issues? What locations are problem spots? And then we look at the future conditions and figure out, use those models, use those traffic forecasts, figure out how things are going to change and how those safety conditions could potentially be impacted. Next slide, please. So how we identify impacts. So two of them that are most likely to potentially be evaluated for potential mitigations are traffic operations. So like I said, there's a mobility standard that's identified for intersections. So there's standards identified on I-205. So we'll compare the build to the no build conditions and figure out if those standards are going to be met. We'll look at the safety side, build compared to no build. That's how we identify our impacts. We compare to these, the build and the no build scenarios against each other and figure out what the future is going to look like. Next slide. So that impact analysis, that really drives how we figure out what mitigations are needed, if any. So that we're kind of of those three levels that I talked about, we're really kind of trying to move between the first and the second one. So kind of going from the regional modeling to that DTA sub-area modeling, that's where we're at in this process. So the timeline for us to figure out these more detailed analysis is likely early next year. So identify potential mitigations. We could be looking at intersection improvements. If there's rerouted traffic due to the toll, we'll look at that. We'll figure out whether what the impacts to delay at the intersections are. We'll look at what the congestion relief on I-205 is. If an intersection is impacted, then we would identify a mitigation at that point. Again, I'm talking a little focus on traffic here, but there could be other safety, access, equity, all of those performance measures. And across all those different disciplines that Jennifer named, we'll be looking for impacts in all of those areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so taking a step back a little bit from the technical analysis, I'm going to just talk about some of the committees and technical work groups we have so that you all know how Oregon City is currently represented in those. There's an extensive engagement effort throughout the project. Oregon City staff are on the regional modeling group. The transit and multimodal working group, those are sort of our two technical working groups who are kind of reviewing our analysis and are plugged in from the beginning and understanding our methodology. We have Lucinda already kind of talked about the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. If you looked in that photo of people in the equity on the EMAC, Ray's face was in there. You could, if you spotted it, good for you.
Just to clarify, I mentioned that on EMAC, it was a joint meeting with the Transit Multimodal Work Group. So I'm on the Transit Multimodal joint meeting.
Yeah, sorry about that, Ray. Your picture was on there, but yeah, thanks for the clarification. I appreciate it. The regional partner agency staff and various participating agency meetings. Next slide, please. So, we continue to produce a lot of information, and there'll be more information and details as we kind of get through the technical analysis process. So we'll have various briefings. Our community engagement liaisons are also meeting with various smaller groups. We've been doing presentations to community-based organizations, businesses, elected boards of commission. We listed a few here, including some of the business groups in Clackamas County. Lots of outreach underway with those groups. Next slide. And so here's Lucinda and Garrett, the toll policy manager at ODOT's contact information. And I think from here, we'll open it up for questions.
Well, before we start on the questions, I want to point out that I only have Ray from the committee on my screen. So if anybody has questions, they probably should not raise their hand, but voice something so that I can hear it. And also, I don't know how to raise my hand anyway on this thing. So, but I do have several questions but I will hold mine until the end. So I think in the interests of moving along, I'm going to call on members to have their questions ready. So if somebody has their questions ready now, say so, and then we'll start.
I do.
Okay. Go.
I'll spin through them and then you can probably pull them out. First of all, how are you going to collect from out-of-state traffic or others outside the area and not leave this burden just to the people of the Portland metro area?
I'll take that one. So we'll have cameras on the gantry, take pictures of folks' license plates and send out invoices. So that will happen interstate and outside of the state for people who do not have accounts.
Okay. Is there anything going to be accommodations for people who carpool that are two or more people in a car during the commute hour?
At this point, since we are not doing a managed lane, we're doing all lanes tolled. There is not a carpool. But I'm sure there'll be some data that Matt will show us about how that would look if we did consider carpools.
No, without having the lane, but is there any way with the technology that somebody, let's say they have a transponder equipped in their car, that they could be in the iCommute group with somebody? Because that's the whole idea. You're trying to get people not to all drive their cars at these peak times. Why aren't you giving an incentive to people doubling up to reduce one less car?
I can say that I've been in other programs that have had the transponders, which they don't really tell you how many people are in the car. We're asking the customer to identify how many people might be in that car. Those programs are all being looked at now. I think California is 3+, other places are 3+, and they're trying to get rid of those programs because there's really not a great transponder that does that, because we really don't take pictures of people in the vehicle. And that's what you would need to really identify that you are a carpooler. So
Okay.
At this point, go ahead.
I can add a little bit on the technical side on that. Our preliminary look at our regional modeling has shown some propensity for some degree of shifting from single people driving single occupancy vehicles driving by themselves to high occupancy vehicles, or basically sharing rides. So part of that, I think, is inherent. If you share a ride with somebody, you're likely either splitting the cost or you're paying it, then and your passenger's getting a ride for free. So there's been some indication that would happen.
All right, the next question on here is, what about short trips? Let's say you get on the Abernathy Bridge and you get off at 10th Street. Are you going to get prorated the mileage you're commuting through that zone? Or are you going to get the full Monty for the whole trip, just when you have to only go one exit, but there's no really any way to get around it?
We're looking at segment-based tolling, so you would not get the whole Monty. You would get it for that segment.
So the off ramps will have a sensor on it then to,
We're not sure where the toll points are, but we are planning on doing segment tolling, in which case we will have different gantries at different places to do that.
okay. Next question was, now how is it that all those improvements were done near Mall 205 that took, I don't know how many years, that escaped the tolling project, and yet I drive this route every morning, so I'm quite familiar with it. And I would tell you that when you do your data, that probably 30 or 40% of the cars during the commute hour are from Washington State. And my personal belief would have been put it at that bridge, whatever they call it now, by the airport, and get them as an entry fee, because they're the ones that are actually, they're all the trucks and the service vehicles and other people transiting around the metro area. They're going, through this area here. So I tell you, during the pandemic, it's been awesome. Till June 1st. June 1st was like a magic day. Everybody showed up to work, and the traffic now is back to its old habits, where before you could really get from point A to point B with pretty low restrictions there.
Can I just add a little there? You were talking about folks who are coming over from Washington.
Mhm.
The Regional Mobility Pricing Project actually captures that movement from Glenn Jackson Bridge all the way through on I-205. So we would be capturing those trips.
Well, I know you're going to capture them, but I'm telling you, that's where your traffic is coming from. A lot of it.
Oh, you're saying there are traffic causers. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to stop all commute traffic from over the bridge and on 205 down the 205, you would find your congestion would disappear. Because I think really the lanes were designed for Oregon, not for the expansion of Clark County, of how many people are living on that side and working on this side. And it's the same way going back at home. At night, there's a lot of vehicles. I mean, I've done, just for boredom purposes, count on my commute by 7 miles there, how many Washington plates there are. And it's pretty amazing. Now, I don't think they all live here in Oregon. I know that they're either going to appointments or going to jobs, or they're doing their service calls, or they're transiting the state to somewhere else. But that's kind of it'd be interesting to see what those demographics, what that survey comes out to be.
A moment.
Yeah.
Tim?
Yeah.
If you contact the Department of Revenue, I'm pretty sure they could send you over a breakdown on how many people living in Washington are paying Oregon income taxes.
Yeah. But not all of them are all driving here though. So, but yeah, there is a percentage of it. But when you're on that route, you can see there's a lot of Washington plates on there. And there. Now, you mentioned on the Boone Bridge, are there improvements there? Because you have from the 205 interchange at I-5 going south is the disaster zone at 4 p.m. and on. You guys just spent a fortune of money down there widening that. What is the cause that all of a sudden it disappears when you get to the Boone Bridge on the other side of it, that the traffic flows great? And they're going to do any improvements in that part of this project, whatever that problem is?
Boone Bridge would be replaced, and the interchange is near it. So if that is a choke point, it would be addressed then.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out where it is, where's the checkpoint is, but it's right at 205 interchanges where it, in Nyberg Road. That's where it always piles up, right up there. I'll let somebody else go on here. I had, I think, 2 more in here, and I got to get my thoughts on these other questions. So hopefully, thank you.
You're welcome.
Henry, I have several questions if I can be in turn.
Go, Bob.
Okay, and all of this is a result of my reading in great detail the attachment here for the presentation tonight. On page 1, excuse me, it references congestion relief and tolling on Interstate 5, I-5, and Interstate 205 corridors to reduce traffic congestion in the Portland metro area. Where is the I-5 study? I haven't heard anything about addressing an I-5 tolling.
That is the regional mobility pricing project that I mentioned. We are just in the preliminary stages of that one. Actually, it kind of changed after last year when we came out with the I-205. We did I would call it the environmental assessment blitz of communication. And what we heard back from folks were, hey, what about the I-5? And what are we doing for that? So we were just doing, what was it, north going, Multnomah Boulevard to north going, I think was the limits before. And now we have extended that, and it's literally from near the Interstate Bridge all the way down to Boone Bridge, and then the rest of the I-205. So that's a separate project. We're starting on that now. That was we've kind of been going around just the beginning parts of communicating out what the big project looks like, but it's in its preliminary stages.
Okay, well, that gives me some hope that something other than I-205 is be considered then.
Yes.
Let's see. Also on that same page 1, substantial public input. And I haven't seen much of public input, and it refers to a policy advisory committee. Was that the committee that you just showed us recently?
No, that was the VPFA Value Pricing Feasibility Analysis Committee. That was back in 2017, 18, right after House Bill 2017 was in.
Okay. Was anybody from our area on that committee?
I wasn't here then, so I can't. I don't know. Matt or Jennifer, do you guys know? If not, we can get back to you and let you know.
I don't know the
Please get
specific.
back to us, because later on in my questions, it refers to this area as being an underserved area. And if we don't have people on those committees, it'll continue to be underserved. It's also said the purpose and to manage congestion on I-205 between Stafford Road and Oregon 213. Why that restricted area, which will cause substantial impact on traffic in the surrounding areas? Why was that particular area decided?
During the value pricing feasibility analysis, that was what was, I wish we had a roster of who was there back in those days, which we will provide to you. But the committee decided that that's where the limits would be. So that 7-mile stretch.
I'd be interested in who was on that committee if anyone lived around this area.
Those limits also
Yeah.
coincide with the last segment of 205 that's only 2 lanes in each direction, which is that big choke point at certain times of day. So that's the area that is proposed for widening and the bridge improvements that Lucinda talked about at the Abernathy Bridge, as well as the Tualatin River bridges. And so the tolling, advancing that piece for tolls to help fund that capital project is why those limits are set the same as the physical limits that would be changed during that construction project.
Well, it kind of moves into my next question, is that on page 3, it states tolls collected on I-205 are anticipated to be used to fund congestion relief projects in the corridor, including, and this is the key, but not limited to the I-205 improvement project. which says that they can use the proceeds from the tolling on just about anything they want to use.
Last September, the Oregon Transportation Commission set a policy that tolls collected on a corridor would stay on the corridor in which they were collected. As far as the corridor limits, that is still a process we have to go through with all of you of defining the corridors. But technically, it's saying that the money is staying there, so it's not going to Rose Quarter, which is on the I-5. It's staying on the I-205.
Okay, well, I'd like to see that better defined then, because this says but not limited to kind of makes it a little nervous. And then I get to this point where I kind of referred to it before as the goals and objectives. Engage people from the historically underserved communities to participate throughout the project design, development, and implementation. So anyway, I would be interested in having more people from this area involved in the planning of this whole situation.
And that would be our Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. And I believe we did actually ask every county or city if they could nominate someone or let us know who that person was. I'll check on there. I doubt that there's somebody specific from Oregon City, but I know there's a few from Clackamas County. So we do have some representation. As I said, the room's not big enough to get every perspective on equity. We were looking for people who had lived or worked experience in equity.
Well, since the Oregon City area will probably be the most, well, and West Lynn will be the most drastically affected area. When this takes place, I would think that it would be appropriate to have an Oregon City, at least one Oregon City representative on any one of the committees. On page 20, it says during the peak period, travelers choosing routes to the Arch Bridge increased to 35% to 45%. This is present peak periods. I wonder what will happen when people try to avoid the toll. What percentage would reroute to avoid that toll? And has that been analyzed?
Oh, Matt.
Yeah, I can handle that one. So yeah, we're in the process of looking at it. What that's talking about is people who are avoiding congestion on I-205. So this toll project is one of its primary objectives is to reduce that congestion on I-205, and as part of it, the I-205, if with the I-205 improvements would then widen that corridor, so more cars would be able to use I-205 and cross the Abernathy Bridge. So there's a balancing effect of improved performance on I-205 with what you're talking about, which is people paying a toll to experience that. So we'll be looking at the sort of the net effect of those two things. Is some people are going to not pay the toll and they're going to take a different route. Some people are going to see a travel time savings and be happy to experience that and be willing to pay the toll. Others are going to change how they travel. Some of them are going to share rides. Some of them are maybe going to travel at a less congested time when that toll cost is lower. So what our analysis is going to do is going to look at the net effect of all those combined changes in travel patterns. And we're certainly going to look at the traffic impacts on either side of the Arch Bridge and figure out what those impacts are. Anybody who drives that area right now knows it's already very congested during the peak hours. So there's not that much room to give. So we'll be assessing all that and figuring out what the net impacts are going to be.
Also on page 20, it refers to the analysis parameters and sample size used streetlight data set Monday to Thursday. Why that time period? Monday to Thursday.
Most of our analysis for assessing traffic conditions is typically on average typical weekdays. So we're looking at those weekday travel patterns as the primary consideration for design. That's pretty standard procedure when you do traffic operations analysis and when you design intersections and figure out if things need traffic signals or if we need more turn lanes. All the things that go into traffic analysis, they're generally focused on those peak hour demand periods on weekdays. And so that's kind of the rationale when we analyze those traffic patterns and really how those travel patterns change. We look at them for those peak hours during the weekdays and then those off-peak hours, because that's when you're typically most likely to experience congestion. And that's what we were trying to get at, is that change in travel patterns between those congested conditions and not congested conditions.
On page 36, it refers to the roads that will be affected as alternate routes. And those are Borland Road, Willamette Falls Drive, Oregon 99E, Stafford Road, and Schaefer Road. I think you should probably also add to that list Highway 99 and downtown Oregon City. If they're not already on that list, you've really missed the ball on that one.
They're on the list. We'll look at those. They're included in our.
Okay, because they're not on your report that I read. They're not on it at all. Let's see here. Page 73, the biggest changes in traffic volumes, quote, those did not include Highway 213 or 99E either. So you'll have big changes in traffic volumes in both of those highways. Let's see here. Page 75 through 78 refers to social resources. And what do social resources have to do with the impact of tolling the I-205 Abernathy Bridge? Maybe you can give me a proper answer, but my first reaction to this is it looks like eye candy in an attempt to overload or overwhelm with useless data. I mean, it's just 3 or 4 pages of that information. Why?
I'll take a stab at that, and Jennifer, Lucinda, feel free to add in. But I think a big part of the conversation with the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee is they're definitely interested in how different communities will be impacted by being able to access different community resources. So part of the process for how can you get to the places you want to go, how can these different communities get to where they want to go, is by looking at different travel patterns and first mapping where those locations are that are important to people, and then mapping how the travel patterns from and to those places could be impacted by this project.
Okay, just to encourage you, I'm almost through. Page 79, what is SCUBA? SCUBA. I know it's an underwater operation, but in your case, what is that?
I think that's part of the EMAC that Lucinda talked about, the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. They have some working groups, and the person who develops those groups likes fun names. So he has a SCUBA team that does a deep dive on the NEPA process. And so hence the funny name. Lucinda, jump in if I'm missing anything here. But first time I saw it,
You
I
got
was
it right.
also like, what are we talking about?
It's not an
That's
acronym.
interesting. You should answer that with the ocean behind you.
Yeah, oh, that's right. I do like the beach.
On page 80, again, some initials here. What is RTP? What is OHA-PhD, CCS, HIA, and what is an MCE toolkit? I mean, those letters probably mean something to somebody, but if you're putting them in a report, there ought to be an explanation of what the heck they are to the average guy like me. I don't suppose anybody has any real fast answers to any of those questions, but, for future reference, give the average guy a chance to understand what you're talking about. Page 82 to page 92. Equity framework informed performance measures that go beyond what is federally required. This chart identifies problems and possible solutions, but doesn't show how or who will be doing the things listed. Nice big list, but it doesn't show how it's going to accomplish. And again, in my viewpoint, it's nice eye candy, but it doesn't do anything. And it's kind of hard to read.
Well, we're going to work on our plain talk, plain speak, plain writing, and our acronym usage. I think we do a lot of it, but we're very comfortable in that area, and we should realize that others may not be as comfortable as us. All the equity measures that you see there, or maybe possible recommendations, would go to Oregon Transportation Commission. We're trying to figure out what equity measures there may be. And that's what the group does, the Equity and Mobility Advisory Group. They are, or committee, they're coming up with equity measures for tolling, what would make tolling equitable. Those things you see are possible things to do, not how we get them done, but just bringing them to the surface of what we could do to make this program equitable. So you'll see a long list of things. And at this point, we haven't looked at each one, dug into it and say, this one we could do, this one we can't. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to surface all the possible things that need to be done. So that list is extremely long, and it's going to be longer. The committee has great ideas about what we should do, and eventually we'll look at them and say yay or nay. But at this point, we're just trying to surface the ideas.
Okay, well, I appreciate your patience with me going through all my questions. I must say that my opinion of this project is quite dim. With all respect to you folks giving us the report, I can't imagine a worse area on the entire length of I-205 to have a tolling that not forces people, but that allows people to choose to go through Oregon City and increase the traffic problems in Oregon City than the one at the I-205 interchange for the bridge there. So thank you for your patience and your answers.
And thank you for reading the report. We do appreciate
Yeah, it was, it's 100 and some pages.
What I want to say is that the I-205 is where we start. That 7-mile stretch is the start. The regional mobility pricing project is the whole corridor, which means literally what we're talking about, diversion, dissipates because there's no place to get off to go to. You can't go around a whole metropolitan area. You can, but it takes time, and time is money. So I think you'll see as we do the whole system, it works as a system. It probably doesn't work project by project, but when you see the system and how it's all put together, I think you'll see the difference. But thank you so much. Great questions.
Savannah or Ben, either one of you have questions you want to ask?
Ray has his
Yeah, I'll let Ray go. He has his hand up.
Okay.
I have a question about figure 21 on page 54.
Go.
It's regional scale between Salem and Oregon City. Is there a more zoomed in version that shows the reroute in downtown Oregon City as the people go along 99E coming off I-5? Where they stay on 99E through Oregon City, or are they going to, because if 99E is congested, are they going to use a different route to get to I-205 north, near Main Street or Oregon 213? And so I'm trying to understand which route people would travel through Oregon City from Canby. Is that data available?
Ray, are you referring to the corridor user analysis?
It's a streetlight data. I don't know if that's
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that information, that streetlight information is kind of existing rerouting that happens today due to congestion. So that's people who we think would likely want to use I-205, but because of congestion and the traffic backups that happen there, they don't. So they pick a different route. There will be a different kind of diversion or rerouting that could happen as a result of the tolling. So we're going to have that congestion on I-205 is going to get cleared up. But we're going to have people who don't want to pay the toll, and some of them are going to reroute to other roadways. So that's not coming from that piece of information. That'll come from that modeling that I talked about in those steps of that analysis. So that's not available yet, but that's part of it. So part of it is the traffic that's outlined in that streetlight data. Some of that will move back to I-205. And there'll be the kind of these dynamic shifts happening. And like I said before, we'll kind of assess the net effect of that and figure out how much and where the rerouting in Oregon City and other communities could be.
Okay. So that level of analysis with where once they go, once it comes to Canby, which route to take, whether to take South Point Road or stay in 99E or go along Main Street, the reroute from the reroute, the branches from that, sounds like later on, not now kind of analysis.
Right. That's something that traffic modeling that I talked about, that's something
Okay.
that it's good at. It'll consider, the one effect of, okay, a trip comes off I-205 and takes this other route. Okay, what happens on this
Okay.
other route? Is there a secondary effect based on that? Vice versa, if something is now, a trip is now coming onto I-205, does another trip change over? And that can vary depending on the different origin and destination pairs that are traveling along the corridor. And so it's really going to capture kind of all these dynamic, sometimes overlapping, sometimes contradictory travel patterns, and it'll capture the net effect and what the end results will be in terms of volumes and how people travel.
Okay. Look forward to that data. It sounds like a future meeting, I'll be able to see that data. So thank you.
What kind of safety data do we have out there, being that we're, pushing people off of a very controlled corridor of a highway, and we're now incentivizing them to be going into surface streets and city streets and collector streets, where now our interactions with pedestrians and bicycles are coming into play more. So, the net goal of the tolls would get them off this road, but are we really just transferring them into a more dynamic environment that could create bigger problems in the long run?
Right. Yeah. Good question. So one piece of it is the existing data, so we know where those hotspots are and where those kind of traffic safety concerns are greatest. The other piece is that modeling that will then predict what the traffic volume changes are going to be. So we'll consider the net effect of it overall, the volumes and how they change at specific locations. We'll also look at the overall kind of impact on the system. So how many vehicle miles are being traveled throughout the entire system, and how much congestion there is on those trips, how much vehicle travel time there is overall. Those will all be kind of inputs into the consideration about the overall safety impacts.
Okay.
And it
And,
will,
sorry.
oh, I apologize. I just thought of one other thing that I wanted to add. You mentioned kind of the shift of modes. If people decide to travel differently, we would consider that as well as part of the regional modeling.
I was just going to piggyback off that because one of my questions was, I'm not sure if it was in the presentation or report, but how much of a notice are you going to give travelers before they're able to decide if they want to continue on or jump off? And is there going to be research or data for that congestion of people trying to get off to avoid the toll? And then this is more just feedback and not a question. Part of my concern is how it'll impact a lot of undocumented citizens, especially when there's a larger community coming up from Marion County and using 99E and the freeways. And if that becomes a trend to avoid the toll, this kind of leads into being profiled on the streets or other diverted roads. And I think, in my humble opinion, using a scanner is more of an easier way out than an equitable way out, because work vans, again, undocumented citizens, people who haven't gone to the DMV, and how's that going to affect, like, if someone else gets wrongfully charged, how do they dispute that? And I want to thank everyone for putting together the project. Great job. Thank you, Lucinda, and your team.
I think I can answer part of that. And just can you talk to me just a little bit more about the scanner? I'm
Sorry. Yeah, how the scanner is going to charge license plates.
Yeah.
And then bill, like,
yeah, send a bill.
yeah, it sounds kind of just like an easy way out to charge people running through, and not so much of a, hey, like, this is a toll, we're going to charge you, if that makes sense.
It does. And let me just, I'm leaning heavily towards an invoicing system versus the way it's done every place else, which is really an enforcement and a violation. And literally everybody is taking pictures of everybody's license plates. That's how you capture people who are using your road who don't have an account. But they usually send you a violation notice. Most of those, if you go to Washington, you miss it, it's $40 each time you go. So if it was a 50-cent trip, it's 50 cents plus $40. And we're trying to get to something that's a little bit more customer friendly in a sense. So the invoice would not be $40. It'd be the cost of us doing it. So trying to find that kinder, gentler, but there has to be enforcement, because if there's no enforcement, why have the road? So we're trying to come up with an enforcement measure that is not as heavy-handed as giving your firstborn for 50 cents toll.
Thank you. Oh, one last thing. I also wanted to mention an agreement with Tim Morgan that the running joke in, like, the Portland and Oregon areas, why are there more Washington license plates and Washington residents in Oregon than Oregon? So I also feel that the toll should have been at the Washington entry bridge. Thank you.
So interstate replacement project, interstate replacement, IBR, interstate bridge replacement project. That's it. That bridge will be tolled. And then if we're tolling on the Glenn Jackson side, then that means we're capturing Washington residents who are working here, and they're paying a toll just like the rest of us.
Yeah, I have a question I can add on to Savannah. So that was one of my other points in here. So if we do the system where you're photographing and sending an invoice, you're going to have those particular people who are just never going to pay. I sit on 3 HOA committees, and I've got one in my own neighborhood where a guy continues to park his boat on his driveway, and he just snubs his nose. And he doesn't even pay the fine or the HOA dues, and he lives in a very nice house. Okay, so you're going to have that percentage of the population that just says, "I'm going to drive the route every day, and I'm going to throw the bills away." So then, what mechanism are we going to use to everybody? What they all like to say, "Pay your fair share," so it's equal for everybody. Because if we're going to just be sending bills and hoping they're going to pay for it, what kind of accounting is this going to cost the state just to track all these bills of people, these deadbeats that won't pay?
So I will tell you, in every program I've ever worked in and across this nation, there is folks who don't pay. And different states do different things. I think I seen a guy in Chicago at one point, he was putting liens against houses. I think that's way far for a toll, but people have tried like everything. Collection agencies, it just other, in Washington, they do administrative hearings. Everybody tries something. We will have some enforcement. Nothing's foolproof. If somebody doesn't want to pay you, it doesn't really matter. We'll put in some different measures. So invoice would be the first thing. Violation would probably be our second thing. But we're not going to start off with the violation. We're going to start off with the invoice.
Maybe you can put it on a DMV registration. You get a prepay of so many credits on your license plate. And then you'll get a notice that you need to fill up the kitty on there so you can get some more.
Registration holds are another tool that has been used for tolls when you don't pay your tolls, is to hold back your registration.
That'll be a line.
Yep.
John, you got your hand up. Is this a question or a comment? Or are you there still?
A little both. Yeah, my internet connection's not great. So are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
I keep bouncing in and out, so I apologize. I'll keep my camera off. But Jacinda, you mentioned the gantry timing and the fact that they haven't been established yet. I can't recall, and I didn't spend a lot of time with the Phase 1A plans, but Phase 1A plans basically take it from 230. Well, they're actually between 99E interchange and 213. That's kind of where that project limit starts. And then on the West Lynn side, it includes, the interchange there on that side. I don't remember seeing a gantry in there, but I didn't study those. Is there a gantry included in Phase 1A or gantries included in that Phase 1A project, as far as you know?
No, the toll program is a little bit behind on the construction. We need approval from FHWA to do tolls. So that has not, you won't see the gantries in the construction plan.
So does that mean that, I'm assuming those require some design elements, right? So is that kind of settle the fact that we probably won't have gantries in that section of the project, or will they just be a higher cost because of the timing?
No, actually, you probably will have gantries somewhere in there. That's going to be done by our toll folks. So we brought on a general toll consultant. We brought on a few firms to help us with that. And then we'll have some vendors who do roadside, and they will help us determine where those gantries go, and they'll put those up. So it's a totally different project and totally different group that'll be doing that, not part of this construction group.
Okay, so they're not gonna, so there'll be no contingencies for foundations or anything like that. So we won't get that. Okay. The equity and mobility, this is kind of mysterious to me, especially when we're talking traffic. And in an area that's relatively diverse, I'm just trying to figure out, can you share some good examples of what we're talking about when we're talking equity and mobility, and what solutions might play out? Because I'm confused about that. I mean, even at the local level, there's this desire to do that. For instance, spend more traffic dollars or transportation dollars in, your community that maybe has, a different, I guess mobility, if we're talking ADA mobility, but I think this is different than that. So, and my internet connection is saying unstable. So hopefully you can hear that, but can you share anything that would help?
Sure. I will tell you that we are, for the toll program, first in the country to go forward with an equity program, or even trying to build one in. Most time it's anecdotal. Communities come out and they start sharing their concerns about a road that already exists and what it's doing to their community. And the programs then try to do something on the back end of that. We're trying to literally surface what equitable measures could be done now. I can't gut check you and tell you what they are, because I don't know. You have to live in the communities where that happens, because it will be different for every community. Equity is not a one size fits all. It's a what's needed in that community. I would say that, do we know what it's going to look like? No. Is it going to cost money? Probably. There are some free things we can do. We're all doing equity now by opening up the avenue to have the conversation. So actually having an equity mobility advisory committee that can get together and surface concerns and provide recommendations and be a part of the process is an equitable measure. And that one's free. What they come up with may not be. I would assume there's going to be some transit component. Mobility, maybe talking about bike ped, roundabouts, maybe some stop signs. They're going to be concerned about some intersections. Low income, of course, but we have House Bill 3055 that already gives us some parameters on low income. There are a multitude of things that I think people need in their communities that we'll hear from them what those are. So I would say that you're on the right track if you don't know what it is, because actually we're not shooting in the dark. What we're trying to do is daylight needs of communities. And that takes a lot of humbleness to listen to some things that we probably have not heard in the past that we'll have to address in the future.
Okay, good answer. I've got a couple more.
Go for it.
And this one's for Matt, maybe modeling. So the last time I saw some modeling stuff, I think Dana showed it to me maybe a year ago. And, it was early on. And, the model numbers pretty much showed, things, pretty problematic in Oregon City by a multitude of many for each of those corridors. So I know you've been busy and working on this. Is there an update that you can share? Because it seems like it's just we're looking at the numbers, and it'd be nice to see new numbers and see how maybe different strategies might help, because the original numbers were pretty dramatic for Oregon City and West Linn.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. Yeah, I think you're referring to the screening analysis that we published around a year ago. And so that was looking at a few different options for how the tolls on I-205 can be configured. So that included kind of a single point toll just across the Abernathy Bridge. It included breaking up the toll across multiple locations along this piece of I-205, and then it included a zone toll, which somebody asked about earlier, which was basically anybody who kind of hit this piece of I-205 would pay the same toll amount, rather than kind of breaking it up by how much you use. So we were looking at that at a relatively high level at that point, because we were trying to figure out which of those alternatives should move ahead. Alternative one, which was the single point toll, is the one that had the most concentrated rerouting impact potentially for Oregon City. So that one's kind of had been screened out, and so we're kind of focused on two of the alternatives 3 and alternative 4. So we don't have results, kind of updated results to share for those. So I can just say that, there's definitely the rerouting potential through Oregon City was, a significant consideration in that process. And we're working through, and we'll kind of share as we go along the next phases of the analysis.
So does that mean then that you're still at the macro level?
Yes, we are still at the macro level. Since then we've been kind of working at narrowing down and refining those. That's what we've been working on, is kind of narrowing down from those options and refining down, defining the process, working with defining the performance measures we're going to use, and there's a lot that goes into these NEPA analyses, and exactly how we're going to do them, what the assumptions are that feed into it, and the process for it. That's what we've been working on.
Okay. One other question I have is on modeling, is the construction phase work. Obviously, phase 1 is going to be pretty impactful to Oregon City. And so just kind of thinking about that construction impact, and whether there's been any modeling with regard to how this project, which is like supposed to start in next 2022, right? So is the modeling at a point where ODOT can share with us a better analysis of what we can expect during construction?
The focus of the modeling, we have the analysis for 2045, and that's kind of been the focus of our analysis at this point. That's sort of the long range, right? We want to fix this, address these issues in the long range. We will have modeling as well for 2027, but we haven't done that deep. And NEPA does consider the construction, the impacts during construction as well, but we haven't done that analysis yet.
And then I've got one more, sorry. And this one's back to you, Lucinda. So what we heard was there's kind of a short-term funding solution for phase 1A, which is kind of shuffling some of the existing project money that's in the region around. And at least that's part of the fix. Is and so I think the legislature made that decision, right? That was
Yes.
made at the legislative level. And so what I've understood is that short term, because that money still needs to be paid back. And what I'm curious about is what I've also heard is that, look, tolling is really, there's no question that is the solution, but I'm not sure if that's an opinion or what. Do you know, is there still kind of this outstanding chance that the legislature could make a different scenario that wouldn't include tolling?
So right now, House Bill 3055 allowed us to finance, in which case we were at 100 million. I think it gives us $600 million of literally state credit to go use and borrow money. Our limit is 600 mil. That's Rose Quarter has money in that, and also I-205. The legislature gave no money for the I-205. So they did give money for Rose Quarter, but they gave no money for I-205. Tolling is the way that they instructed the OTC to go forward. So tolling is still the linchpin to all of this.
So question on that, but John, is it all right to ask this question?
Yeah, I'm done.
So let's say that our politicians in Washington, D.C. come up with this transportation bill. I don't know how they're going to pay for it, but will Oregon be able to benefit by that to maybe offset some of this tolling cost? Because the one concern I have about the tolling is the cost of accounting for it to collect it. We're talking, lots of accountants and billing people and postage stamps and pensions and PERS and all this other stuff to collect 50 cents or $2 or whatever it is going to be. That money could be used actually into the project instead of the administrative costs to run it. So do you think that, is Oregon on a list of senators and congresspeople, or are they got our wish list in there of money we need for these two big infrastructures?
I'm going to be honest and say I do not know, but I will find out and get back.
Maybe when they do, you find out, maybe they can get a 205 extension to hook over to 26, and then that'll solve a lot of the 217 problems and the rest of the I-5, going up there. And that land that they were supposed to do, they talked about for decades prior, is to continue on that curve there. I think that would solve a lot of our infrastructural or traffic problems around this metro area. So if we had a loop, basically, so you don't have to keep going through the center of the city to get from one side to the other. We'll be behind you on your request for the grant money. So.
We will get back with you and let you know. You'll probably get it tomorrow. I'll just send it to the committee.
Henry, I've got a couple more questions that came up in my mind. What happens when the license plates can't be read? In other words, when you get into bumper to bumper traffic?
Actually, toll equipment is very good. It's like 99.9% for a read. So
wow.
very little,
Okay.
even bumper to bumper, there is still some delineation between one vehicle and another.
Now, I keep thinking about the state of Oregon's unemployment system breakdown during the COVID crisis. Is there a system in place elsewhere that proves your anticipated system will work?
Oh, all over the country. Well, let me say this, tolling is all over, not only this country, but the world. And the toll industry is technical, and it's pretty proven all over you can look at Florida. Florida has more toll roads than most states, Texas, New York. I mean, pretty much every state has toll roads, and the ones who don't are now looking at toll roads. So toll roads been around for centuries and will probably stay that way. Is it good? Yeah.
Okay,
Is it
well,
good?
I hope
Available.
we're using a proven system. I've been involved in the business world in two different totally disastrous computer system changeovers.
I've seen those also. I
Yeah,
understand.
I'm sure you have. And it
We're
makes me a
gonna-
little nervous, when you're trying
As I
something
said,
brand new. So that's encouraging.
we're not trying to be on the bleeding edge of technology.
Good for
So-
you.
Okay, now I'm going to ask my questions. And before I do, I'm going to have to say that I used to be the city engineer for Oregon City. And I was a professional engineer, licensed civil, and that I worked for ODOT and several cities on various around, and ended up working for Oregon State Parks and commuting from Oregon City to the Capitol and back 5 days a week. And that I lived here in Oregon City for 29 years and have watched the various things going on. And what my point of all this is, I would like to know if the models have had any sensitivity analysis done to them recently. I'd like to know if the underlying assumptions for the models have been validated again. I would like to know if anybody's concerned about the land use issues of what's happening in outlying areas that are not within Metro. Canby, for example, is increasing their industrial output tremendously. Molalla is going to be next on the list. I also know there's only 3 bridges across 2 rivers at this point, and they're all within 2 miles. So anything that goes on to the south and southeast of Oregon City has to come through Oregon City to get anywhere else, not just to 205, but to get to Portland, to get to Gladstone, to get to Clackamas, where there's more industrial area. And so I think that the analysis of the project needs to be included about another order of magnitude in area to get the true impact of what's going to happen. So take it for what it's worth, but I'm not impressed with Metro's model. I know I have had discussions with Metro 15 or 20 years ago about how it reacts to fringe areas, and it's not very accurate at the fringes of that model. It's good in the middle where they've got lots of interaction points, but they don't feed in good data from the outlying areas because they're not concerned.
Matt, can you?
Yeah.
speak to that? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So we have talked about kind of the broader context. So I talked about 3 levels of modeling. I didn't talk about a 4th level of modeling, which is the statewide level. So ODOT, Oregon DOT owns a statewide model, and in earlier versions of this, we did run these potential in the value pricing feasibility analysis study of a few years ago that we talked about. We did run this scenario through that statewide model to assess if there could potentially be broader impacts. We're in the process of kind of doing that again with kind of the updated assumptions and the latest version of that model. So we will look at that of like the broader context kind of beyond the metro area and address those. From what we saw in that analysis a few years ago, it was a pretty similar travel pattern. We didn't see kind of impacts beyond the metro region, and we saw kind of the same potential travel rerouting patterns. But yeah, I mean, we will look kind of beyond the metro context, and that was and looking beyond the metro regional model, you know, that was sort of part of the impetus too for us looking at that streetlight data to get a sense for to get another data source to look at it.
what about the sensitivity analysis? If various assumptions can produce strange results in math models.
Yeah, so the sensitivity analysis can go a lot of different ways. So we do base our assumptions on the land use and growth assumptions that are in the regional transportation plan. That was one of the acronyms that was in there. So that's kind of a starting baseline for our long-term planning efforts, as you kind of start with those assumptions. You're absolutely right that you can poke and prod at those and twist those knobs and adjust them with different assumptions. But kind of our standard process is to kind of evaluate the project to make a set of assumptions about growth in the region, and then focus on how the project can change things, so that we're evaluating the project and not, different assumptions along the way.
But the various comp plans from the various areas, are they included in that analysis?
Yeah, the Metro model, the land use assumptions that feed into it are reviewed by each of the jurisdictions. So they get a chance to review those, dial in, make sure the growth that's anticipated in terms of both households and employment, and even the types of employment, are aligned with their vision and their comprehensive plan. So each of the jurisdictions in the metro regions has an opportunity to do that.
What about the outlying areas beyond metro that feed into it?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer of how metro look at those. I think that would work through the counties. So I think Clark County, Washington County, Multnomah County, et cetera. Of course, Clackamas County would all get a chance to review that, and they would be generally in charge of those outlining areas.
But it just seems like on a project of this magnitude that some of these assumptions need to be, periodically addressed and verified again. So anyways, anything else? Well, then we want to thank you, and we will move on to the other part of our meeting, which is the Clackamas County bus service to Oregon City.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, ODOT and ODOT team. Yeah, it was
Thank
great.
you.
Appreciate it. All right, Henry, I'm going to try this, but I keep getting this internet connection's kind of poor. But Vance, if you could let me share my, I guess I can. Let me try to share my screen here. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just trying to get the word out.
I'm making you co-host, John.
Okay.
Okay, your co-host. Try it now.
Okay. So can you see this is basically the Clackamas County website for the Clackamas County Connect shuttle service. And really just kind of, I think most of you are in the know. I don't know what our listening audience is looking like right now, but whether, it's the listening audience or whether it's your outreach to the community that, hey, there is a kind of a last mile shuttle service in Oregon City now, and it's running weekdays. And we've got in that webpage, it's pretty easy to see the route map. While there's a route, there's also an opportunity to deviate. So I think it's called a fixed route deviate, something I'm trying to remember. It's fixed route service, a deviated fixed route service. There we go. So you can call them and ask them to go outside of their range, and they will do that to a certain distance. But this is the route shown, and then there's a schedule as well on there for the Oregon City shuttle. If you remember, this was a grant-funded project, and Clackamas County also got a grant for their industrial area shuttle, which is really down on near Highway 212 and takes folks to the Clackamas Town Center. There's a connection there. So a couple of, I think, shuttles that we think will be well used. I didn't find a picture of the shuttle, but Dana put this together for me for the CIC meeting. So you probably, let's see, what are you seeing? It's really just, I think, a PowerPoint slide of it right now. So this is what the shuttle looks like. You may have seen it around. I've yet to get on it, but Dana's been on it. It sounds like it's a pretty nice vehicle, ADA accessible, and they really did a fancy paint job on it or wrap on it. So it looks quite nice. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. I think, it's a grant funded project. It's a contract operator who's doing it for the county. And as far as I know, we've got funding that is intended to last long-term. Long-term could be probably 3 years or more. It needs to be successful. And I think with the change in our community and more need for alternate modes of travel, I think it will be. But again, if you're in your neighborhood meetings, if you get on other Zoom meetings, please reach out to those folks and remind them that Oregon City now has a last mile shuttle, and it's pretty convenient on weekdays. I think they're considering expanded service on weekends as this kind of rolls out and continues to become successful. But they're taking, I think, steps within the existing grant funding to be able to before they grow that program into additional hours. So that's all I wanted to say about it. I know Dana's on, and I also know Ray's got some familiarity with the program as well. I don't know if I missed anything. Feel free to speak up, but otherwise, that's all I wanted to say about that.
John, is any of that on social media for the city that we could forward on, or OC Chit Chat? I don't know if anybody's forwarded on to those type of things.
Yeah, I don't frequent those a lot, but I know it's on there. I've seen it on my Facebook page come out. And I believe Dana's shaking her head that yes, it is. So she's a little better at that. She's got a lot more friends than I got, right? So she's probably gets a lot more social media than I do. But yeah, I think it's working well. And I don't know, some of you that frequent those areas, can you confirm that as well? I saw Ray shaking his head. I don't know, Savannah, do you see it pretty regularly in your social realm?
I have not. I've yet to see it pop up on my page.
Okay.
I've seen
John,
it.
would the schedule and route be available for us to print out that or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think the better thing, Bob, would just be to refer people to the all you have to do is put in Clackamas County Shuttle Service or Oregon City Shuttle, and it takes you to the county website. So that might be the easiest way. But if you've got online and you want it for yourself and you want to print it, it's definitely available on the web page.
Okay, thank you.
It was in last week's Oregon City newspaper too, a front page.
That's
Well,
Henry, that's all I had for that.
so is there anything more? Then I think we should be adjourned. Anybody have any
Oh.
objections?
I have one thing, Henry.
Go for it, Bob.
It looks like our future meetings, we may again be meeting in person.
What?
Yeah, the next CIC meeting will be meeting in person. I think that they're scheduling all the committees, boards, and so on to once again get past the COVID thing and meet in person. So
And what-
everybody should be alerted to any changes in that.
I wonder where City Hall is now.
Well, that's the question, is some of them are meeting in the old, or in City Hall and the old city chambers, commission chambers. And then others are meeting up in the police department facility.
I think I can contribute a little bit to this. So yes, there is in-person meetings. I know the city commission's first in-person meeting is the 21st of July. What I'm not sure about is if the public is allowed to come to that or not, but there's going to be both. There's going to be the virtual option and I know staff and the commission will be meeting in person for sure at the police station. And the committees that I understand that are meeting at the new police station are city commission, urban renewal, and then the more of the kind of land use side of the house. So I think the planning commission and historic review board, and then all the other committees, the CIC, TAC, parks, natural resources, they're going to be meeting at the current city hall. So where we've always met. And we don't meet in August, or we're not planning to meet in August as far as I am understanding. So our first meeting for TAC would be in September, and it would be in person. And Kim will make sure that, or somebody will make sure, that we get you that information.
So we'll be able to see if anybody actually has legs or not, because I've never.
Yeah.
I see from right up here, you could all be like, wearing pajamas every day.
I think the other little outcome of this is that, again, for some of this equity mobility kind of conversations, the expectation is for public meetings that we provide the online or Zoom, some meeting format for folks that can't make it in person. So that adds a fair amount of complexity for folks like, Vance is doing a great job running our electronic meetings, but anyway, we're going to have to offer that as well as our in-person stuff.
I can see where it's going to be a bit of a change for the chairman of the meetings too, having to figure out how to watch the screen to make sure that the people on the Zoom part of the meeting are given a chance to operate. And Vance still has his hand up for some reason.
No.
I think Bob does. I lowered his hand.
Thanks, Vance.
Roger that.
So now then, once again, does anybody want us to last any longer, or shall I call it a day?
I just have one, comment or thing for future discussion. As this, I-205 polling proceeds forward, I'm curious about how much, advisement our committee wants to have with the city commission, with letting the city commission know where we stand on the tolling project. Is that something the committee is interested in doing, or do we want to just have our committee discuss and not tell the city commission how we feel about it? So that's something I want to explore.
Right? That sounds like something that John should bring up with the commission or the city manager to be able to kind of make sure that we're all on the same sort of a page.
Do we need city commission approval to do that? Or, because I think, isn't a tech supposed to advise the city commission? I'm just trying to understand what our role is in this situation.
Well, I'm not sure what our role is in the situation, because we have very little control over any of it. We have the ability to put our opinions in for what they're worth, but the legislature is driving this particular aspect of the project. So.
Yeah, but I think when we know a little bit more about the inputs, Ray, it's still so gray about what
I agree. Yes.
The state's trying to go through that. And I think as we, we're not the only ones concerned about tolling, by the way. I mean, I think all of Clackamas County and the Clackamas County board, the city commission has heard multiple updates from ODOT. So they're really well plugged into that. Our mayor is speaking to the OTC, isn't that right, Dana? Didn't you have, I don't, so she's pretty plugged in. I just think that it's still so kind of arbitrary and not really certain what that is. I think knowing our agenda and knowing that we're trying to get informed on that is good, but I'm just not sure what else to, at this point in time, to do. If the TAC wants to send them a memo, kind of acknowledging your concerns, or that could happen. We could definitely draft something for the committee to look at, but I don't think it's timely right now.
Where's the best point to apply pressure at this point, John? Or is it a wait and see where that opportunity arises? Or
Well, I mean, ODOT's been instructed to move forward with all these programs to kind of deliver it. I mean, part of me feels like it's, if there's any room for softening, adjusting or eliminating tolls, it's at the legislative level. And I just don't know.
I mean, the perception I got from the presentation was this is happening regardless of our input.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. It's really just kind of, how they go about it. Part of me still feels like there's questions about timing. So, why would they push the I-205 toll before the rest of the region? And I think some of that has to do with this NEPA study, and they lean pretty hard on that. But I kind of question still, if you're going to do tolling, it seems like tolling the region makes more sense than tolling a little, 7-mile section of 205. But
John,
Yes, it-
I think I can give you a little clue as to why they're focusing on 205. You've got a captive audience. There's in the section that they're dealing with, you can't get on and off very easily, very often. North of Clackamas River, you have interchanges about every mile. On I-5, north of 205, you have interchanges about every mile up through there, and 405 comes off and comes around. And I noticed they didn't even talk about I-84 at all, which ought to be interesting. But
I guess it's-
Well, the thing is that, like I said before, their report that they gave us refers to I-205 and I-5, but so far they haven't done anything progressively on I-5. But my opinion about advising or speaking with the city commission is the very name of our committee defines what we should do. It's traffic, which is obviously the I-205 tolling process, and advisory, which we are obligated to advise the city commission.
I'm trying to say, yeah.
So what is the question?
I guess I should also clarify that I'm not talking about whether tolling should happen or not. For me, what my focus with telling the city commission is about the safety concerns, especially with downtown, with walking, biking, riding transit, that those things we have control over, because we can work with ODOT and our other partners on making sure that our TDM plan, what Kelly presented about our last meeting, make sure that that doesn't get ruined by tolling and diversion. And in my mind, that's what we have control over. And so I would personally like to advise the city commission on how, at least I'm concerned, I don't know if the rest of TAC is concerned, but I'm concerned about how tolling and potential diversion would impact TDM efforts in downtown. And that's what I like to advise the city commission on.
that would certainly be a good point to make such a letter around, because that's something that we could do as a city.
Should I make a motion now or wait till we have more data from ODOT? But I mean, I'm ready to write a letter about that, or we can wait until there's more data from ODOT. But I guess I'll make a motion to write that letter.
I'm going to ask Dana a question, which is, what's your take on when a major, or when a decision point is going to be coming up in some of this, as to thinking about how much time we might have to put a letter together and get it to the commission, and perhaps have them have some back and forth between them and us before it gets to, out to ODOT.
That's a good question. So I guess maybe what I can share is those 5 or 6 committees that they listed. I
Right.
said all of those except for the equity and mobility one. So I attended the regional modeling, the transit multimodal, the participating agency, the regional agency update. So I have tolling meetings at least probably every other week. Ray's
You're a
in a
meeting
lot of those as
person.
well. So we're definitely, Oregon City is definitely involved and following all the details. Like Matt kind of said, they're in this process of kind of moving from one kind of type of modeling to the next piece. And, as they're kind of doing that, it's like a funnel, right? So they're identifying where would the gantry points be? And so then that changes, right? So that first level of modeling that John talked about showed a huge impact to Oregon City in one of the alternatives. And that alternative, based on the City of Oregon City's initial NEPA letter on tolling, was very clear that we didn't support that option moving forward because of the large impacts to Oregon City, right? And so, we had that formal city letter that was sent, I think, from the city manager. So I think that next big piece is, as ODOT works through kind of this, how they're going to address this impacts to regional streets piece. I think that's the next big comment period from the city. So, has Matt talked about what are the impacts today and what does that next level look like, and kind of seeing that. And, during our modeling workshops, we get presented kind of what that looks like. They send us reports, we review them, we ask questions to ODOT. So their team is very large. Keeping track of all of the players is, can be difficult, but they've always been very open to answering questions. They hold kind of what you would consider like an office hours, where you can submit questions, and if they don't have the answer that day, they get it back to you. Those are important pieces, and they are answering questions and addressing things. As we kind of walk through these and we take these steps, they've been responsive. That alternative that was the worst impact to Oregon City is off the table. It will happen. Tolling will happen because the legislature stated, it would, unless FHWA says no. And ODOT has 2 different routes to get the tolling. So they will get tolling. And again, that first phase is this section of 205. But fairly quickly, and by fairly quickly in ODOT terms, it's 2 to 3 years, tolling would be implemented on that entire section of I-205 and I-5 from the Washington border all the way down to the Boone Bridge. So our section of 205 is really going to act as that test case. And we will be on our own for the first couple of years and have the impacts of tolling and the diversion that it would create. But once the rest of the metro region on I-5 and 205 is tolled, that's when we would kind of see that balancing of the diversion, right? So anyone that was diverting off of 205 onto I-5 to get around the toll is maybe not going to divert once I-5 is tolled. So, I think that next big piece is really this: how are they going to identify off 205 mitigation? And do we agree with their methodology and what they're coming up with? And so they'll kind of have a process to identify that. Once they kind of agree that these are the right areas that need to be mitigated, then the next phase would be, what is the mitigation?
So it sounds to me, Dana, like the gantry points, at least for a short term before the whole system is up and running, is going to be that next big access point. Do we have any hope in affecting the decisions? Because in her talks, I think it was Lucinda had mentioned, she kind of said that's not in the works and we're just going to kind of throw that on after the fact. and they haven't identified where those points are going to be, is that something to me that is going to be a huge point of concern for us trying to mitigate all the off traffic without knowing where those are going to be? And do we have any hopes in putting them where it benefits us the best or impacts us the least?
The two alternatives that are moving forward, they actually kind of already have visuals that kind of generically place the gantry points. And I think where she was trying to get with that is the gantry points will not be built with this phase 1A that's moving forward for construction. So they would come back with a separate tolling construction project that would put in the gantry points and those kind of things, because they haven't been finalized, and because we don't actually have the approval from FHWA to toll, they can't, design that and build it with this first phase of 205. So the first phase of 205, that House Bill 3055 she mentioned, does essentially provide the funding for the phase 1A, which is $375 million for 205. That's phase 1A. The entire project, I believe, is $600,000 or $700,000, or $600 or $700 million. So, if the federal government offered up money, we could find a way to spend it. The likelihood of them funding enough that we don't need tolling is probably unlikely.
But isn't it kind of strange though? This is a federal highways. This is a federal highway. I-5 is a federal highway. 205 and the 405 are all federal highways. You cannot toll the entire nucleus of Oregon. You can't get through it. There's other states all have options to go around, whatever. And basically you've just held the entire state hostage at Portland Metro. And you can't toll something unless you build something to prove that you've done it. For example, if you go back to when my dad said when he watched the Golden Gate Bridge being built, they said it will, once we get it paid for, we will stop the toll. I don't know what it is now. I think it's around probably $6 one way or round trip if you go. And it's still being tolled, and they've paid for that bridge many times over. Okay. So when you're sitting here and you're cutting off everybody coming from Washington and California coming through our area, and you're going to have a bounty to get through this area at the expense of the local residents, I think they're going to spend more millions trying to collect on people who are deadbeats who will not pay for this. And you're going to create this new nucleus of like the IRS of Oregon to collect 50 cent or $2 tolls. I don't know, whatever the number is. They won't tell you what they're thinking so that we have any way to budget for it. We don't even know if it's so cheap that even the poor can afford it. They can just put in 5 soda pop cans.
So Tim, the theories on those are probably not far off. I don't know we're not tolling experts, but what I would think we could do for the September meeting would be we could have, so Dana wrote the city's response letter to the state that yes, the city manager signed, the city commission reviewed. So there was lots of comments on that, but there's a significant letter. I want to say that was a 8-page letter or something like that. It was pretty lengthy, that went into all the kind of different concerns that we had based on what we knew at the time. And there's similar letters that come from all the local jurisdictions, including Clackamas County. So Wilsonville, Gladstone, Milwaukee, Lake Oswego. I wonder, Dana, I think that package, the county had collected all those letters and has that package. Maybe that would be worthwhile to share with the TAC so that they know at least what official city response has been done to date. Now that happened about 6 months ago. So I think what I heard from Dana was there is going to be a better time, and that better time would be when the state kind of responds to that and says, well, here, we heard you and here's what we're doing. And then we'll have another, whack at the apple. And I think informing what the tax opinion is to the city commission would be, because I suspect there will be another letter that will be requested of the city and we'll want to submit. So I don't want to kick the can on this, but I just think timing means a lot in here. Now, some of the other things that Ray might be talking about with regard to, impacts to some of our local plans, then,
I'm trying to get us to talk about.
we can schedule those topics. We've had that TDM plan in front of us, so they've spoken to the TAC before. It's really just kind of a lot of those projects we don't have a way to fund, to be honest with you. But would traffic diversion make them even harder to implement? Oh, no doubt, right? No doubt. So if the TAC would be okay with that, in the interest of time, I guess I'd like to make sure our next agenda packet includes those letters, and then we can have an agenda item on that then at that time, and that would be in September.
John? Hey, just a quick one, because we're into overtime. Would it be possible to identify or partially identify projects, at least down in the immediate area of the interchanges and the bridge and the old bridge? Projects that would probably be affected by the tolling, and get a cost estimate put together for those, and include a request in the letter saying, well, if you're going to do this tolling, how about funding these projects to take and ease the impact on us?
Well, the one thing is with Oregon City, what people don't realize is you have all the communities south of us coming through 205 or 99 and 213. You got Beaver Creek and Milano and Canby and all those things here, where West Lynn really only has West Lynn and Lake Oswego coming through there. We're nucleus center right here, where it's all going to begin.
We're on the wrong side of the rivers.
You are on the wrong side. We're trapped. Unless you want to go to the airport, we're fine, but it's a long ways to go around to get to the city.
And one of the things we got is the next bridges outside of Oregon City is at Carver and Newburgh.
So Dana, is that something that the ODOT is offering in this package, is some sort of mitigation to our projects for the disruption?
That's kind of that next step. So once they understand that difference between kind of that baseline condition and the tolling condition, then they can see, how many diversion trips is that, in a day or in a week. And then, really looking at, does that create mobility issues for vehicles? So do we start to fail our signalized intersections? Do we need turn pockets? Do we need longer, queue storage for our left turns? And then kind of that flip side of that is if part of the goal of tolling is to get people to choose other modes, right? So non-single occupancy vehicle trips, are we seeing the carpooling? Ideally, if you're going to carpool and there's two of you, you'd split the toll. So then it's half the toll, right? You'd kind of work that out. One guy drives one week, the other the next week. Is there adequate transit service, right? So the Oregon City shuttle is, internal to Oregon City. There's a lot of regional conversations about, SMART looking to run a bus from Wilsonville through West Lynn, through Oregon City, and stopping at the town center to address that. There's lots of regional discussions about how do we get transit, specifically some kind of either shuttle or bus on shoulder, that if traffic is backed up, that transit service can bypass the traffic. And so there's lots of regional conversations about that. So could this tolling money that's set aside to address these impacts, participate in that? Could it participate in vehicle projects? I think the other piece of it is bike and ped. Could it support some of our transportation demand management projects in our downtown? where we've identified concerns for walking and biking. You know, if someone lives in Oregon City and works in West Lynn, are they riding their bike or are they walking? Do they have a safe way to do that? And so I think that's kind of that next piece. And as we see more about where they're showing those impacts, I think that's where we would take, you know, the projects in our TSP, the projects in the transportation demand management plan, you know, other things that, you know, we've seen and, you know, since the TSP has been done, and really start looking at that list and saying, you know, if you're going to fail this intersection or you're going to create, you know, safety hazards on 99E, where are people supposed to walk and bike? Walking and biking facilities on most of 99E are pretty limited. You know, we're getting ready to start the work to identify what those walking and biking improvements would look like on 99E along the river. You know, if we can come up with a plan, you know, can we say, hey, you should participate in this? You know, there was the big discussion about the bicycle and pedestrian bridge that wasn't the arch bridge to create, you know, a more inviting and safe option to cross the river. You know, is it they should fund that project long term? You know, I think those are the questions that'll come out of this. And I think that's the point where once we have that data, we can really say, this is where Oregon City wants you to focus, right? We're not going to be able to ask for 20 things and get them. We're going to have to come up with kind of this prioritized list and really be able to justify those needs based on the data that comes out of the modeling.
Do we know how many vehicles travel each workday on 99 and 213?
I don't off the top of my head, but I do know how to.
ODOT has the data.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, that's what we have to do, the impact, as you can imagine, you know, how it's going to be. And they did answer the question. They're not going to give any incentives for people to carpool other than saving $2.
Let's not forget that they're adding a third lane. So, you know, there's going to be a period of time when those 3 lanes are in place that they'll have more capacity than they have today. The question is the tolling set such that people, despite the fact that there's less congestion, you know, choose to go elsewhere? And, you know, I think so. I don't want to overstate it. I know it's going to be impactful. I don't want to understate it. I know it's going to be impactful, but I just think that, you know, we can paint it with a pretty ugly brush if we want to right now. And I just don't feel like the time is right.
No, I think this is very important that we're getting some of the input of what's going on, what they're thinking, so that we can find a cure before they get into an infection. And then we're just like, you know, they throw their hands up, well, sorry, we're just going to move on, but make them start thinking about all these items. We don't have Max coming down here to take away that extra run, you know. And Oregon City really, I think, is the one that's getting screwed in this whole deal. Because we're going to have a huge impact of traffic from the neighboring communities south of us. And then they're going to try to figure out alternatives to get around it. But you notice it's, you know, they're not tolling the Portland area. They're only tolling Clackamas County area.
But they are planning to toll.
Well, they're planning, but they always say they're planning. They also said they were planning on putting in 3 lanes here many years ago too. So now that at least they're doing it, I mean, we give them credit for that. But this is a federal problem, not a state problem, because they created this Interstate 5 to bring traffic, you know, north and south along the West Coast, and we're in the middle of this. And there's no other place on I-5 is tolled that I'm aware of. If you drive from Canada to San Diego, I don't think there's a place on there where you're tolled. And I've driven the whole route. It hasn't been recently, but it will be the first.
Well, their very wording in their report that they provided us referred to this area being underserved and underrepresented.
Yeah.
And that leads right to the fact that they're planning to do the tolling in our area. And they couldn't ask for a worse place to enforce or impose traffic congestion in Oregon City itself. It's going to be a mess.
Anyways, at this particular point, I would say, number one, to sum it up, yes, we should be getting the letter, and along the lines of what John was saying, we should be working with the idea that the letter would be 3/4 written or something until such time as it's time to submit it. That we should have some idea of the costs of what it would cost Oregon City to ease the congestion in the downtown area around there, so that we could include it in the letter and say, here is what the impact to Oregon City is anticipated to be. But get this background information put together so that when the time comes to actually make a final letter, it'll be easier to do.
Agreed.
So with that, I'm going to call it a meeting. I'm going to say it's
What letter are you
over.
referring to? I'm trying
It's done. This concludes the meeting, and Vance, turn off the recording.
What letter are you referring to? Can I just clarify? What letter?
Yeah.